Hello, and welcome to The Trumpet, the official podcast of Elephant Room Productions. As always, I am your host, Robert Jean Pellecchio. If you're seeing me again, then that means good news. The first video episode worked. We're doing another one. So today, just like last time, we're going to be having a nice little discussion about theater. And I have two guests with me tonight. Let me bring them in. Where is my fade? There we go. So coming back, I've had them on the program before to talk about their piece Ground Effect. I have Playwright Jonathan Alexandratos. And
hey, everyone.
I forgot to check again. That is correct, right?
Absolutely.
Boom. Got it.
You nailed it.
I try. That's my one victory for the day. And then, of course, I have Elephant Room Productions artistic associate, Latrice Smith, who has been with us for years and is irreplaceable and wonderful, and we love her.
Oh, you're too sweet to me.
I was saying right before we started the call that I realized this morning while I was setting this up that I forgot whether or not I made it clear that this was going to be a video episode, so I remember thinking, like, I should probably let them both know. Also, I really hope Jonathan is wearing their blue lipstick because it's amazing. I mean,
what am I
Latrice,
not?
You look good too, but I mean, come on.
Again, I can't compete. You can't compete where you don't compare, man.
So last time we were talking about streaming theater. We had a really meaty, healthy conversation about that. So I wanted to kind of transition along to another topic that I've been very interested to talk about, and I've been interested to get different opinions on, and that is the idea of non-traditional gender, race, and even non-binary casting in theater. Now, obviously, as a cisgendered white male, I am the most appropriate person to spearhead this topic. No, it is because of that reason, actually, that I wanted the two of you to chat with me on this, because I feel like I have certain opinions on it, many of which are cultivated with care, but I'm sure, just being that my experience does not necessarily match everybody in theater, that I might have some blind spots. So I'm interested to kind of get in the ins and outs of this, and I'm really excited to have both of you on to talk to me.
Thank you. Really excited to be here. And obviously, too, like everything that I would say also comes with the sort of asterisk of blind spots, because goodness knows, like, I mean, I have my own as well. So I think that'll be really kind of interesting to navigate a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's why we get these different perspectives. You can't speak to, every different subgroup and genre. So it's nice to be able to talk to peers that have different backgrounds from you to kind of figure out what those blind spots are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess just the best way to kind of jump into it would just be, generally just like to get people's kind of first impressions on a topic. So, obviously we are seeing a lot more today in the way of non-traditional casting. Sometimes I think we can all agree it's revolutionary and it's handled very well, and other times maybe it's misguided, maybe it misses the mark. So just to start out, what is I guess I can say, when's the first time each of you remember seeing a casting, whether it was a full cast or even just one character, that you felt was more inspired by the talent of the performer versus a need to fit a particular role?
For me, I think it was, I'm not sure what year it came out, but it was the ABC version of Cinderella with...
You know what's funny? I'm cutting to a picture of it on screen right now because I had it queued up ready to go, because I knew that was gonna be my answer too.
Yeah, that's like the first one that comes to my head that really I remember being like, whoa, like, wait, what is this? Like, what is happening as a child? But actually not even really questioning it, just being like,
No,
oh,
and that's why I think that one works so well. It's because they didn't cop to anything. They didn't it didn't seem like stunt casting at all. Everybody, there was no argument that those actors were those characters that were right. And I have it pulled. I should have had it pulled up already because I knew that we were going to talk about it. But just to kind of describe what is on screen right now. So you've got Whitney Houston as the fairy godmother, Brandy is Cinderella, which off the bat it's not uncommon to race bend a classic character like that. But where this movie was really ambitious is you've got Whoopi Goldberg as the queen, you've got Victor Garber as the king, and with no explanation given or needed, you have Palin Maltaban as the prince. And they even had even the stepsisters. You've got Bernadette Peters as a stepmother with two stepdaughters. One of them is a person of color. I've seen countless writings on that subject of how brilliant that casting is. Jonathan, did you grow up on that special?
Well, so no. I grew up on Transformers, which you really can't talk about in the context of non-traditional casting because they're all robots. But though that
don't worry, we're gonna talk about animation at some point today too.
Well, I mean, and I was gonna bring it up a little bit because if you watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the guy who voiced Shredder was the uncle from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. So if you can kind of make that mental leap, which I was doing kind of early because I learned that kind of early, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. So that now one voice can clearly work for multiple bodies. So you have to sort of expand that then into the realm of theater. But I think theatrically speaking, the first time I ever really became aware of it was when I would see plays that were about historical figures, and the people they cast to play those historical figures did not look like the textbook version of those historical figures. Now,
how many Tony Awards does Hamilton have?
Right. So exactly. So there's that, and that I sort of came to whenever that came out. But there were other examples where I guess the earlier examples of this in my mind are examples where in my head the character is like a stuffy old white guy, and on the stage it's a young white guy. Now that's not really the greatest example of like diversity or doing anything with that, but that was sort of my earliest like, oh, okay, so Isaac Newton in Lucas Nate's Isaac's Eye can look like that, or Edgar Allan Poe's Poe can look like that in Nevermore, that musical. They're still white guys, but they're now different. So now my mind, of course, goes to the next step from that, which is to say, well, what if we blew that up even more? Like, what if we explored that even more, like the way Hamilton kind of did, and really started to open that up? Because if we're already going to just sort of check out the window the like whole thing about, oh, this no longer has to look like your textbook, then great, let's open that up to everybody, races, genders, etc. Just do that.
I think for me, obviously, you can't. I think it's very hard to find someone who is not aware of the Cinderella in any way. But I'm going to go a different route and talk about a piece of theater I saw as a young child. When I was a kid, my mom would always get Walnut Street Theater subscriptions, and we would always, every couple months we'd go to see whatever show they were doing. And they did a production of Annie once, and I remember there was a brilliant African American actress that was cast as Miss Hannigan, and even as a young child, I'd grown up on the movie, I'd seen the show before. there was they didn't have an African American rooster, but there was no question in my mind this is Miss Hannigan. I that show is very, very important to me, and I've seen it done incorrectly. That's one of those shows where if you do that show the way it's written, it's great. If you don't, I'm gonna be mad. But she, I mean, especially just singing Little Girls. I looked at her, I was like, that's Miss Hannigan. I mean, I was blown away by the effect of, as she sings the last note, they just kind of like the stage just kind of moved her off. But that doesn't really speak to her race as it does the effects of the stage. But that was my first kind of glimpse into the world of like, just because it's been cast a certain way in the past doesn't mean it has to be cast this way now.
I was in a production in 9th grade of the play Greater Tuna, which I don't know if
I've heard of that. Yeah.
Right. So
my boyfriend has like a burning desire to do that show someday.
Yeah, so it's an interesting show. I mean, there are elements to it that I sort of wonder about now, and I also wonder in hindsight if we should have been doing it in 9th grade. But it was interesting.
It's a hard sell for I guess that young, but
I mean, and it was also in the South too, so that was
yeah.
But the reason I'm thinking about it is because so many people apparently wanted to be in Greater Tuna and they didn't want to tell anyone no, so they cast 2 casts. So like there's an A cast and a B cast, and
isn't it a two-hander?
It's no Greater Tuna has like it's got the 2 main characters who are the hosts of the radio station, but then there's all the other ones that are like members of the town.
Okay.
And the part that I played in the play was Jodie Buemiller, who in the B cast was played by a girl at my school. And I remember when that casting decision, like mine was the only one where there was sort of a gender difference between the 2 casts. The other one's like male or male and female. But I remember there being like kind of a discussion about that. Now I love it because I've come out as non-binary and I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. Like there's another little notch in my belt or whatever. That's how it is in my mind. I don't think it actually is that, but I think that's how it registers. And I remember thinking in that moment, like, oh, interesting. So you can take these parts and think creatively gender-wise about them. And even so much as seeing it as a masculine person one night and then, a young woman the next. Which was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Well, actually, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Sorry.
Damn Zoom.
I kind of, as you guys have been thinking about this, talking about this, going farther back, I'm thinking of my first experiences in the theater with these things. And I think at first they didn't register to me in this question because it wasn't, as a child, a thing that we even thought about. Like our 8th grade musical was Annie, and I played Miss Hannigan. And I was lucky enough to go to a school that was an elementary school that was quite diverse and was quite immersed in the arts. So I had from like the 1st or 2nd grade, I'm having these experiences where we did Oliver Twist and, half of the cast were people of color. And it was never a thing that was like necessarily discussed or explicitly talked about. So it's something that's registering to me now is these things that kind of like help to shape, I guess, my ideas and views and the way that I look at theater and, gender bending and race bending, because there were a lot of times, like I'm pretty sure in Oliver 1, we had like an A cast and a B cast, and I believe
it's inevitable. It's something that I have had to grapple with as an education director as well. My partner and I we actually just did almost did our first double cast show in like 3 years, because 2 days before we were supposed to go up, the world ended. So But no, that was a, that it was a challenge for a while because the camp we worked at didn't have a cap on the classes, which, from a business perspective, it was amazing for the theater because you had so many children and so many parents that wanted their children enrolled. But once you get 60 kids in Beauty and the Beast, it's something had to give. So that was
a beast of your own. Yeah.
Well, it's funny you brought that up because I didn't even have this as a discussion topic, but we kind of launched it off into it. You do see a lot more of it in the education world, especially because, obviously, well, one, you have more actresses than actors in a younger age generally, but you also, it's when you approach it from an education standpoint, then it's really more about teaching the craft than it is being 1,000% accurate. The best, actually, I can't believe I forgot about this, but going back to Annie, my partner directed Annie years ago, and I was the assistant director, and our Franklin Delano Roosevelt was an African American girl. And I just remember we were trying to cast it, and a twinkle just went into his eye, and he goes, "Okay, go with me on this." And as soon as he said it, I was like, "Yes, of course, that's who she's playing because she's amazing."
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Jonathan, you kind of unintentionally segued into something I had cooked up when you brought up Greater Tuna, but what do either of you have thoughts on I don't want to necessarily call it drag casting, but I'm talking about roles that are specifically, they are gendered roles that are specifically written for the opposite gender. So you're like the, Hairspray, Matilda, and things like that. The reason I bring it up is I actually saw a comment recently about the Matilda movie. I have never seen Matilda on stage. I have no idea if it's a good or bad show. It's Tim Minchin. I can't imagine it's bad, but they had announced that Ray Fiennes is going to be playing Trunchbull in the film. And someone who was unaware of the convention of the stage musical posted a very angry comment saying, "No, stop this. Let women play women." And I was like, well, they didn't just decide this. The character is traditionally played by a male actor. But I couldn't actually answer the effectiveness of it because I haven't seen the show. So what are your thoughts on characters like that, and when does it work and when does it not quite work?
So I think we've had two examples lately of cases that have made me really uncomfortable with that. The first is the recent musical Tootsie, and then Mrs. Doubtfire, which is, I guess now it's been in the works, and I don't know where its status is in terms of coming over here. But my concern with things like that is they are built on a foundation of a really unfortunate wing of humor that basically makes fun of men who have to do feminine things, and they have to do them for some convoluted reason, right? Usually to get a woman, which it is in both of those cases. So to me, it's really hurtful actually to see that, and then to see the advertising material for something like Tootsie, where it's got the male character in drag shaving, right? And the joke is not like, here's a drag performer. The joke is like, oh, haha, isn't it funny that any woman would ever have to shave her face? And it's like, well, plenty of women do, and it's not like, I worry that is not really adding or advancing our social conversation here about gender. So I'm really concerned about where that takes us.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. It feels a lot of these times that the comedy as at the expense of, rather than it being something that we're actually exploring, and actually exploring what it means for this kind of gender, or I guess it's not gender bent, but for this kind of role. We're not exploring what that means for the world that we're in. It's kind of like, oh, ha ha ha, a man in a dress, how funny.
Yeah.
Which, is leans in towards like sexism and transphobia as well, which isn't a place as that we want to move towards, I think, as a
Right.
theater community.
Yeah,
I think you can make the argument, at least for, at least in its at least at its genesis, the convention with Hairspray, where in the original film with which it's based on, Divine was a very prominent drag performer in the John Waters universe. And I understand. I've never seen Hairspray on stage. I've seen the film, and I've seen, I've done a junior version, but I get that the idea of casting a male actor there. I understand that it's kind of servicing the memory of what came before, but again, you're not always casting a drag performer, or so that's where I think it gets. That's one of those things where I don't think the role itself is problematic. I think you just have to take care with how it's presented.
Yeah, because I think that drag performers, they are absolutely worth honoring and presenting and really holding dear in all the ways that we do. I can think of RuPaul's Drag Race and stuff like that, but once you drift away from, I think, the message of like, hey, here's a drag performer, and you go into, here is a cis man, look at how funny they look in a dress, that's where I think we have an issue.
Because I think when you are incorporating a drag performer, that it's an art form. Drag is an art, and you're experimenting with and commenting on and figuring out what femininity and womanhood is and what that means, rather than, as we've been saying, putting a man in a dress and it's funny to watch a man fumble around in heels.
Yeah. And actually, I have a personal experience with that from a couple years ago. There's a company that I have been working with for years called Renaissance Music Theater in Philadelphia. And the first show I did with them was MAME, which is a show that is... So if you've ever listened to the Trumpet and you hear how many of the theater examples I give at the end that involve MAME, you'll know how much I love that show and love that character. And the actress that was playing MAME was a lovely woman. She just wasn't MAME. And they came to a mutual decision midway through the rehearsal process. This just isn't working out. We wish you the best. And we had a music rehearsal, and the director had said, kind of held off as long as he could saying this, but he said, we basically have three options right now. We either scramble to find a new MAME, we cancel the show, which we don't want to do, or option 3, I'm going to be playing MAME. And at first we were concerned, and then as soon as we started a music rehearsal, and as soon as he sang the part, we realized it was the first time, at least for me, it was the first time I had heard that character. And as we went along, he took great care to play the character of MAME, not play a guy playing MAME. And I think that is... He also made the joke that, and I can't exactly disagree with him on this, he goes, I can't imagine Jerry Herman would have a problem with this. In fact, I feel like Jerry Herman wrote most of his female characters so that he could play them someday. But yeah, but that's where I come from with that. I think I definitely think that it can be done. It just needs to be done with care. And I think that was an instance where it was definitely done. It was done in service of a character versus in service of a convention or like.
Yeah, I think that's a good example. I think that, what you described about being in a bit of a time crunch with the pressure and then this really kind of creative solution to that, solving it, is really important. But I think, in the earlier stages of casting a new show, what you want to avoid are cases where you're casting, let's say, the part of Mame, and you're boxing out people from that audition because they're trans or because they're non-binary or because they're of some ethnicity or race that you don't envision Mame to be, or that kind of thing. So I think that the time crunch stuff, and when it's handled with as much care as you're describing, to me, I would love to see that show. I think the shows that I stay away from are the ones where I'm like, oh, so and so really wanted to play that part but was told they can't because of these different personal qualities they have.
Well, then that kind of segues me into we talked about Cinderella and we talked about Hamilton. Do either of you have an example? I mean, Tootsie and Doubtfire aside, do either of you have an example of something that you have seen personally where there was a casting choice that it was a casting choice that defied convention, but it wasn't necessarily backed up by honesty or justification for it?
I see. Interesting. It wasn't backed up by.
It was one of those. I want to take care in how I say this because I don't want to give the wrong impression out. But I think that there are some points where I'll give my example. And that might bolster it up. The revival of Sweeney Todd with Patti LuPone and Michael Cerveris. I've always had a bad spot in my head about the casting of Pirelli in that. They cast, there was a wonderful, talented actress that was cast as Pirelli, and she did play the character male. I just don't think. My issue was part of the crux of the story of Sweeney Todd is that he kills men, and that the first woman he kills spoiler alert if anybody hasn't seen Sweeney Todd since the 70s, the first woman he kills turns out to be the very woman that he had dedicated his life to avenging, his wife. And I think that's one of those instances where I'm always in favor of seeing more roles for women and more roles for people of color and things like that. But I think in that instance, it took away from the gravitas of the climax of the show, because Pirelli is also the first person we see him kill. So I think you lose a little bit of that by having that non-conventional casting in that sense.
So I haven't seen this, and I'm actually not sure that it came through to fruition. But the all-female Glengarry Glen Ross.
Explain. Explain to me.
It's just so there was, I believe it was in 2018 or 2019. There was talks about an all-female Glengarry Glen Ross, and I don't know if it was going to be a stage version off Broadway or a movie. I believe it was going to be a stage version off Broadway, but it is, if you know anything about David Mamet, this hyper masculine, insane language that is, it's a commentary on masculinity and all of these things that I don't know how well would work with women.
You know, they actually, that reminds me of, this actually did get canceled as far as I'm concerned, but there was, there's been a trend in, I think, in Broadway and Hollywood, and as I said earlier, most of the time it's a very good trend. It's to, you know, the fact that women are being given more of the spotlight, the fact that people of color, the fact that people in the LGBT community, especially when it comes to rebooted stories and revived stories, I think it's wonderful. Where it absolutely would have missed the mark is there was a proposed Lord of the Flies remake that was supposed to be done with all girls. And even the author, time and time again, has said Lord of the Flies is a commentary on toxic masculinity. The point of Lord of the Flies, it is a male-centric story. In fact, actually, someone wrote a brilliant takedown of what a female Lord of the Flies would be by just having all of them resolve their issues, you know, in a competent, sane manner, because they're not, you know, 11-year-old hormonal crazed boys. But yeah, to that end, it kind of goes off of what you were saying.
Yeah, I that comment about Glengarry Glen Ross about Lord of the Flies, I would also add in there maybe 12 Angry Men. I know that gets sort of mixed up, but one of the things that I find compelling about the original 12 Angry Men is that it is men, and this is how they are handling this, and they're handling it badly, except for the one
funny.
guy.
I've only ever seen one production of 12 Angry Jurors, and it was, actually, ironically enough, it was with our artistic director, Lauren Chover, / Lauren Krebs. It's funny because as I was watching, I knew just from pop culture and from hearing that term, I knew that it was 12 Angry Men. And it was one of those things where I went into it aware that it was being done with a multi-gendered cast, and I went into it kind of wondering what the differences would be. And I mean, I do want to watch the film now. Now that you've brought it up again, and now that I'm thinking about it, it does sound like a story that I would enjoy seeing in its original form. I just don't know. I can't speak to what the difference would be because I haven't seen it that way.
Yeah,
but I totally get it.
Right. I guess the flip side to the conversation is that, you know, as someone who teaches a class on literature, right, I try not to privilege one interpretation of something over another. So that sort of compels me to think when I see something like, let's say, an all-female Glengarry Glen Ross, you know, my first thought is, I know how I interpret that story, which is pretty much the same as what everybody else here has expressed. But, you know, if this company wants to get together and try it out and see if we learn something, I guess that's the only way we'll learn at the end of the day. I might not necessarily see it that way, but if they want to give it a shot, you know, I also wouldn't stand in the way of that, I guess.
I think the important thing is there needs to be a reason for the casting. If it's if it's a new work, then I'll be first in line to support it. But if you are flipping the script on something, and again, I don't want to sound disrespectful to those who do have a powerful point of view, but if the mission statement is, hey, wouldn't it be crazy if fill in the blank was fill in the blank, I feel like you might not be working with the best of heart in service of the art and the piece.
I think my frustration usually stems more from the question of why the reboot at all when I know for a fact there are trans authors in playwriting, in theater right now, creating scripts specifically so that we can have modern trans characters on stage. and they're getting nothing, and they're amazing writers. And I'm not trying to plug myself here. I can think
That's
of
fine.
plenty of people who are fitting this bill.
Well,
And
actually, I'll use you as an example because I was looking through the cast breakdown of Ground Effect before this call because I was trying to remember what you had listed, and the non-binary character in that play you do specifically list it as non-binary any race, and I love that you give that freedom to a casting director to take that, and I love that you give that opportunity to. You're not boxing in. There are very few characters actually in that show that are specifically designated, as you have to fit in this box to play this role. Which I wish we could see more of. I think we're going in that direction.
yeah, and that's also not to knock the work of someone like Danye Love, who specifies, this role must be played by a Black person or a Black queer person, because I think also that, being the flip side to this is really important too, like the specificity of that. And he's specifically writing for that experience and is like, no, you must be that in
That is
order
insane that you just threw that name out because I worked with him for like 2 days. My first ever out of college theater job. I was a teaching artist at a school, and he happened to be my co-teacher for like 2 days. And I have not heard his name in 6 years.
Oh wow.
So I need to catch up with him. I still have his email somewhere. I need to.
He's amazing and has done amazing work, and has also put out amazing theory about theater, specifically addressing kind of specificity of story versus other cases where it could be more general.
Yeah. Well, I guess one of the last things I want to hit on, yeah, Jonathan, I did promise you we would get some animation question in here, because even though this is a theater podcast and we talk a lot about theater, I have always had a strong passion for voice acting, especially now that I'm a podcaster, and I have been, doing my own readings. I've been listening to audiobooks, and, I grew up on The Simpsons. I grew up on home movies. Lauren Bouchard is very notorious for what I'm about to ask, but where is the line drawn on gender and race blind casting in terms of animation? I want to use Lauren Bouchard as an example because Lauren Bouchard is notorious for this, and I think again he does it with care, and he does it in a sense of what's going to service the character. But look at home movies, look at Bob's Burgers. He's even got another show coming out called Central Park, where there are male voice actors that play women. There are there are white voice actors that play African American characters. There are African American voice actors that play white characters. Now, I am of the mindset, being a voice actor is, having the ability to create any character. Other people don't share that opinion. And I'm just curious, what are your... Oh, excuse me. I should not have had root beer with my cocktail because now I can't talk. But no, like, what are your thoughts on? Are there points where it's acceptable or not acceptable to break, your identity mold in terms of a character you're voicing?
I think for me, it's the steadfast rule also in theater, as long as the character role you're playing isn't informed specifically by their race or their gender identity. Like if the story specifically is about, a young Black kid from the inner city who is experiencing, you know, serious things that relate solely to his blackness, then I don't think maybe having a white male voice actor is the right choice for that. But if something like Adventure Time, or it doesn't have to be something lighthearted like that, but I think as long as, you know, race and gender identity aren't the core subject in informing uh, who the character is, then yeah, sure, anyone can.
Yeah.
I,
I
I
guess it's. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to agree entirely with what Latrice said. I think that, you know, the big question that I think came up a few years ago was, should Hank Azaria still voice Apu on The Simpsons, right? And honestly, the way I have sort of come down on that has kind of been like, I think that moment has kind of passed where the white guy can sort of just do this sort of mock Indian accent, and that's kind of okay. Like, I think I want to be past that. There's a part of me that like wants to sort of demand that, like, there are, you know, Indian voice actors. The Simpsons is quite successful. They don't need to hire, you know, 4 people in a room anymore. They
Yeah.
can sort of branch out. There's an opportunity to do that. So I was kind of on the side there of the people who are like, you know, this is an ethnically specific character, and there's also this really terrible history of white guys doing these voices, just even
Yeah.
as jokes and
I'm
things.
thinking of. I'm just thinking of the third episode of God, what's the Aziz Ansari show on Netflix? Is
Oh,
Master of None, where they
yeah,
show it. It's a 5 minute montage of like the Ashton Kutcher commercial and the
yeah,
you know, all of those things.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah,
So I think being conscious of that stuff, I think is really good. I think on the gender side of it, there have been some really interesting moments where trans voice actors have played parts, and have we've gotten some really amazing, I think, characters out of that. The person who voiced Meowth on Pokemon, on the English version of Pokemon, was a trans woman.
I'm sorry.
Um,
What?
yeah,
You
yeah,
are giving
Maddie
me new.
Goldstein.
You're giving me new information in real time. I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm not doing any kind of post edit on this episode. This is. I am
no, yeah,
finding this out right now.
no,
That's
Meow,
incredible.
so Meowth, the way Meowth worked was there was a voice actor who did Meowth in like the first episode Meowth appeared, and
Yeah.
then the voice actor who did it in every other episode past that was a trans woman, and that to me,
Was this if was this actor was this actress out at that
yeah,
point
hmm,
or
yep,
that is that's insane. How did I can't believe I didn't know that.
yeah,
I try to be very on top of these issues.
she tragically passed away. Maddie Goldstein, I believe her name is. She tragically passed away of stomach cancer, but she was amazing.
Hmm.
Right now, actually, I'm just going to pull down an action figure from my shelf. This is Double Trouble from She-Ra, and this is the original Double Trouble. Now on the new She-Ra, Jacob Tobia voices Double Trouble. Jacob Tobia is a non-binary
Sorry
activist.
about that. That's West Philly.
Oh, that's
It's a
okay.
siren going
Well,
by.
there is a
Sorry,
Double Trouble
go
action
ahead.
figure on screen. I don't blame people
Yeah.
for being excited. Um, so Jacob Tobia is a non-binary activist and author, and now voices the new Double Trouble, which has been totally sort of remodeled. But the idea there of having someone like Tobia, having people in the trans community, where voice is really actually, I mean, it's a point of discussion a lot of times, because as you as some people sort of medically transition or go through transitions that are physical, oftentimes they ask the question of, well, what do I do about my voice? Some people would say, I want to do nothing about my voice. My voice is my voice. And that's totally valid. Some people, others, work with speech therapists to actually sort of modulate their voice, work on the way they sort of pronounce things, because it gives them more gender euphoria to do that. which is another thing that I totally support. Like, I think when you're trans, I think you should do whatever gives you the most euphoria. So voice comes up a ton in trans communities one way or another, whether it's I'm not changing it at all, whether it's I want to work with a speech therapist to do it, or whether it's something else entirely. So I think voice acting then has the opportunity to really embrace that conversation in trans people and understand the unique voices that often come out of that. Sometimes even the voice doesn't change, but then when you put the voice together with comportment and affect and look and that kind of thing, you get some really cool results that I think have been unexplored in a lot of voice casting. And I think it'd be really great to promote people in the trans community who want to do that kind of voice acting and want to put themselves out there and want to try, parts. I think remembering Latrice's point about race along the way is still important. I mean, that's still something that you have to do. But if you are casting Double Trouble and you look at Jacob Tobia and you say, oh, I want them, then I think that's a cool choice.
So I guess the best way to wrap up this discussion is looking forward to the future when this is all over, and it will be all over soon. Someday. But when we are all together in the theater again, performing, and casting and creating new works, where do we go from here in terms of gender and race-blind casting? Do you think we will see more new works featuring these performers and featuring these different groups and people, or do you think we will see more we'll see more reinvention of pre-existing works that are able to bring these people in these groups in the conversation?
I think there are new works all the time that are including new people and exploring different things. I mean, pretty recently I worked on a show in which two of our main actors were non-binary trans people. So and the characters that they were playing FBI agents, and it was actually a word for word transcript, FBI transcript. So kind of these things that you may not necessarily think of, casting a trans person or a person, a non-binary person, but we're having this wider conversation and opening up these roles to them that then add another layer of theatricality and conversation, because what are the elements that adding casting in this blind way, what does that add to the piece that we're working with? So I think all of the new works that are going to come out of this really weird time of people being in isolation, I think that's where we're headed. I mean, I definitely think there's going to be some more Ghostbusters and Glenn Ross.
I love that Ghostbusters. Let's not put that Ghostbusters.
No, I know. I didn't mean it in like a bad way. I just meant like more of like taking something old and making it new through casting in a different way.
Point taken.
I think what's great about that, and I'll continue to make this argument every time people pee their pants about changes like that. If you loved the old Ghostbusters, that movie still exists. If you love the old Star Wars, those movies still exist. They didn't erase those Star Wars just because they put a girl in it.
Can I tell you this to that point? The best thing I've ever seen happen on a stage was I went to a staged reading of Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, which is easily one of the best Star Trek movies. And they had the cast up there. Some of the actors were in Star Trek, some of them weren't. And of course the question was who's going to play Kirk, because everybody, it's not going to be William Shatner, thank God. And so who's going to play Kirk? And as they're introducing Kirk, out walks Mary Stuart Masterson, and she plays Kirk, and she's amazing. It's one of the best things I've ever seen. So there's that kind of way to complicate things, which I love. I do think, though, to your earlier question about change and about the future, we can't have this change until we have an honest conversation about privilege, because people need to understand that doing things like taking Martin Luther King Jr. and casting a white guy is not the same as casting someone who's black as a role that's traditionally maybe white.
You know, I was just talking about that. I forget what theater tried to do that. I was just talking about that the other day, where it was not just Martin Luther King. It was Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King.
Right.
And they cast white actors. And they republished the script with a note in the front saying, you may not change the race of these characters unless... also, just no.
Yep.
There was we could talk a whole nother hour about people who missed the mark on this. There was a high school that did Hairspray with an all-white cast, and their argument.
All-white cast. Well, that's I feel like the most common thing I've seen.
Well, see, like at least like shows like Once on This Island, like there is a version of that script that is about class instead of race, and you can do that show with with a multi-ethnic cast. But Hairspray, they literally their excuse was, well, I mean, we already told the kids we were going to do Hairspray, and then we didn't get anyone like that audition, so what were we supposed to do? And they didn't change the lyrics. They didn't change anything. There's a white kid on stage going, I can't see why people look at me and only see the blacker the berry, the sweeter the... awful. And to add insult to injury, it was a theater department in a high school that already did not have a predominant African-American community and already did not have a prominent African-American presence in the drama program. So don't do that show. Right.
And that's the conversation that I'm afraid that theaters aren't having. That conversation about like who has held power and who deserves to be elevated because they've had power taken from them. And how do we create a system where we do right by the people who have been oppressed in this way? When Daniel Lev, going back to him, speaks about the specificity of some of his roles, what I feel like he's doing is protecting a group of actors who otherwise might be brushed aside because some theater will say, hey, we've got this really great white guy, he can do it. And Donnie Lev is taking a stand to say, no, like you can't do that. And I think that there's a place for more of that in new works and in saying, this role needs to be non-binary. If you don't have a non-binary person, tough luck. Like, don't do the show. You have to elevate these people, or this material is off limits to you.
Well, I totally agree, and I think it's one of those I see it with every issue, every argument that starts with this is. There's that meme that goes around about musical theater songs where there's always the song in every musical, this is the way things have always been done. It's like anytime you use that as an argument, I think it's a good spoiler for the end of the show and the end of the movie that you're going to be pointed at and laughed at, and you're going to get left behind. So I look forward to seeing where we go. I look forward to more Hamiltons and more script flipping as we go forward.
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan and Latrice, thank you both so much for chatting with me today. I love that we have now 2 video trumpets up, and we're just gonna keep doing them.
Awesome.
So thank you so much for coming on. Let me say
Thank you for the invite.
There, you got it. And for everybody else out there who is self-isolating and quarantining, keep up the good work. Stay safe, wash your hands, and tune in next time. Until then, I'm Robert Jean Pellecchio, signing off.
Yay.
Awesome.